Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Bible study in the Avatar series. Today we are in Book 3, Episode 15, the Boiling Rock Part 2. And today we're going to be discussing, hopefully a very applicable one to our relationships with God, and using today's episode as an illustration of what that looks like and what that doesn't look like. If you can turn with me to the book of Romans chapter 8 and verse 12, we read the following. The Apostle Paul has just made essentially a 3-chapter case in building up exactly what our relationship with God is like, and making a fine point of contrast between what we saw two characters model for us as well. Romans 8, verse 12. Therefore, in light of everything that's been said, brethren, we are debtors, not to the flesh, to live according to the flesh. For if you live according to the flesh, you will die. But if by the Spirit you put to death the deeds of the body, you will live. For as many as are led by the Spirit of God, these are sons of God. For you did not receive the spirit of bondage again to fear, but you received the spirit of adoption, by whom we cry out, Abba, Father. The Spirit himself bears witness with our spirit that we are children of God. And if children, then heirs, heirs of God, and joint heirs with Christ, if indeed we suffer with him, that we also may be glorified together. I love Zuko more than I fear you. That's the line that made me love Mai almost as much as I love Azula, and not just because of my unhealthy fascination with scary women. Like my favorite characters in series we've discussed in the past, they make my job here very easy in pointing people to Jesus. What I want to talk about are the two kinds of relationships people choose to have with God, the Azula route or the Mai route. Hopefully, with this episode's illustration and the Bible's explanations in mind, the Bible will make the right choice very easy to understand. So starting with Azula, in regards to fear and how we choose to relate to people and God by extension on the basis of fear. Fear is a powerful motivator. It helps us recognize and prioritize consequences, which isn't always a bad thing. The first proverb in the book of Proverbs mentions that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And it's not the only time that point is made in the book. However, when it comes to the standard we have for relationships, how healthy is it to only see someone through the lens of consequence? I want to do something nice, or else they'll get angry. I want to do the right thing, or else I'll get in trouble. Whether it's with parents, friends, a spouse, no one wants that kind of relationship as the reason you relate to them. Because in the end, you're not even really relating to them. You're just avoiding parts of them in order to get good things from them. Even a first grader can understand that's not a relationship, let alone God. So for an example in this in action, and I want to encourage you read the whole parable on your own time. This is in Luke chapter 19, the parable of the minas. Minas, for those who don't know ancient measurements, is essentially around $10,000 in modern day currency, though that's changing all the time. Hefty amount of silver, so noting a worthy investment. But the full context, while fascinating, also brings up a servant who was called wicked, as opposed to the other servants who brought back more than what their master gave to them. This servant who was called wicked, you could say, is taking the Azula route, and he was judged according to his view of his master. So note, Jesus isn't describing himself, but he's making an illustrative point as far as a flawed perspective. This is Luke chapter 19 and verse 20, and I'll read to verse 26. Then another, this is after the first couple servants had done a good job, saying, Master, here is your mina, which I have kept put away in a handkerchief. For I feared you, note that relationship, because you are an austere man. It's basically harsh or scary. You collect what you did not deposit and reap what you did not sow. He's making him out to be basically Azula, as I take what I want and I don't care who put in the hard work of making it. So, noting this point, he makes him out to be this evil person. So he said to him, this is the master, out of your own mouth I will judge you, you wicked servant. You knew that I was an austere man, collecting what I did not deposit and reaping what I did not sow. Then he asks him, why then did you not put my money in the bank, that at my coming I might have collected it with interest? He's making the point that you didn't even believe that. You were just trying to avoid consequences here. Then he said to those who stood by, take the mina from him and give it to him who has 10 minas. And they said to him, Master, he has 10 minas. For I say to you, this is the punchline of the parable, to everyone who has will be given, and from him who does not have, even what he has will be taken away from him. So the point of the parable is, if you don't have what matters, you'll lose what little you had to begin with. If you have what matters, you'll get even more than what you started. And you can note in vague similarities, Zuko and Sokka came looking for their father, but they also found Suki, whereas Azula came with 2 friends and left with none. You can note that as a good example. But what I want to point out is, like the punchline, the illustration we saw in today's episode also made the same point. Azula never really had friends. People who are afraid of you will only do the bare minimum to avoid negative consequences. But love doesn't have a limit. Fear is lazy and just tries to keep the relationship. But love is very different, which is what brings us to the Mai route. And that look that Mai gave Zuko when he locked her in his cell was a real geek out moment for me. Just honesty here in church. It's not often that I see biblical relationships put on display so plainly as that, because she knew. She knew exactly what he was doing was the right thing, and it was the reason she loved him. He wouldn't let her stand in the way of doing what was right, which means that when what's doing is right in the future, say by her, would also be just as much a priority. Understand that. That's love. Not just avoiding consequences and pursuing feelings, but genuine respect that exceeded her fear of Azula. The Bible describes the same example as the standard for marriage, believe it or not. In the book of Ephesians chapter 5 and verse 25, we read, husbands, love your wives, just as Christ loved the church and gave himself for her, that he might sanctify and cleanse her with the washing of water by the word, that he might present her to himself a glorious church, not having spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that she should be holy and without blemish. So husbands ought, that's a moral term, to love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself, for no one has hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it, just as the Lord does the church. For we are members of his body, of his flesh, and his bones. Then it goes on to quote Genesis chapter 2. For this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother, and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. Now, he makes an interesting point here. For this is a great mystery, but I speak concerning Christ and the church. Nevertheless, let each one of you in particular so love his own wife as himself. Then, with this lengthy description of the husband's responsibilities to his wife to model Christ's character, what about the reverse? It says, and let the wife see that she respects her husband. Respects her husband. Not love? Well, understand, what did Mai demonstrate to Zuko? If Jesus is your standard when it comes to how a husband loves his wife, that's not going to have an off switch, even when the worst things imaginable happen. Because, note our standard, did Jesus stop loving us? A la Romans chapter 6 and 5 as well. When we were his enemies? When we were the jerk that dumped her? But you get the point. That gives a lot more security than the threat of punishment. Likewise, if Jesus is your standard, then for how a wife respects her husband, and you can read the entirety of Ephesians chapter 5 when he goes into detail about this, she's going to trust him even when it costs them something. And I think I can speak for my fellow men here that will mean oceans more than just, oh, I have feelings for you. Because understand, Jesus respected the Father's authority when it required him to go to the cross, let alone Boiling Rock Prison. You want to show how much you love someone in a man's eyes? Show how much you trust them. And that degree of respect is what we saw there, even if it was scary. I want to finish with this verse. 1 John, not the Gospel of John, but 1 John chapter 3 and verse 16 reads, "By this we know love, because he laid his life down for us, as we also ought to lay down our lives for the brethren. But whoever has this world's goods and sees his brother in need and shuts up his heart from him, how does the love of God abide in him? My little children, let us not love in word or in tongue, but in deed and in truth. And by this we know that we are of the truth, and shall assure our hearts before him. For if our heart condemns us, God is greater than our hearts, and knows all things. Beloved, if our heart does not condemn us, we have confidence towards God, and whatever we ask, we receive from him, because we keep his commandments and do those things that are pleasing in his sight. What are those, you may ask? And this is his commandment, that we should believe in the name of the Son, Jesus Christ, and love one another, as he gave us commandment. That's the my route. Not questioning whether we've lost our salvation every time we sin, but remembering who saved us from it in the first place. Not wondering what sins we can commit and not get in trouble. That's the Azula route. Someone with Mai's love for Zuko applied to God knows his commandment. Love one another as I have loved you. Thank you for your time listening to this study. If you have sincere questions, feel free to ask them. If you would like to encourage the ministry, you know where to go. But most importantly, if you know someone who would be blessed by this message, please share it with them. Thank you for your time. Remember that Jesus loves you and that he's called and equipped you to do the same. God bless you, and we'll see you all again next time.